Joining us for the second panel of this conference on the Caucasus, a changing security landscape. I'm Corey Welt of the Institute for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at GW's Elliott School of International Affairs, where I teach and co-direct PONARS Eurasia with Henry Hale, who's just come into the room. Welcome, Henry. In the last panel, we covered a number of security issues from a broader geopolitical level, broader regional level, bringing in a number of actors both in the Caucasus and around it. What we're going to do in this panel is drill a little bit deeper down into certain aspects of what are conventionally called the frozen conflicts. We might call them the thawing conflicts. We might even consider them to be the fully defrosted conflicts at this point. Hopefully not. And for those of us who have been involved with studying the conflicts and involved in the conflict resolution processes in the Caucasus for several years, now is a particularly grim time to be in this business or to be involved. Not only are the human costs of the conflicts as grave as they have always been and exacerbated in the years during and after the 2008 conflict, but prospects for some kind of political resolution to the conflicts also seem to be rather dim, and despite all sorts of extensive activities, whether in the Minsk group or in Geneva and elsewhere, and various other Track 2 efforts, we seem to be sometimes even further away from a final political settlement of the conflicts than ever before. Given that, those of us who try to be more hopeful look for ways for more short-term efforts to manage the conflicts or ways to transform the conflict environments over time, which might lead to better prospects for resolving the conflicts in the future. And our panelists today are going to be looking at a few of these different aspects of the conflicts that don't necessarily promise full resolution, but at the least explore ways to keep the conflicts frozen, for better or for worse, ways perhaps to open up de facto borders to encourage trade and interaction between peoples, and also even to think of creative ways of political settlements which might not be considered plausible in the short term, but as the years go on, we need precisely this kind of thinking in order perhaps to consider solutions which are unimaginable today and conceivably imaginable in the future. So with that, I would like to introduce our speakers. I'll introduce them one at a time, as we did in the last panel. We'll be opening with Professor Mikhail Alexeyev, who's Professor of Political Science at San Diego State University. His bio says he specializes in the comparative analysis of migration and ethnic conflict, but I'd say that he specializes in so much more. He's a brilliant comparative political scientist who is able to merge both aspects of international relations and foreign policy with his study of domestic politics throughout the region. His latest book one of his books is Immigration Phobia and the Security Dilemma, Russia, Europe, and the United States, by Cambridge University Press. And his current research focuses on the social and political implications of the Hajj pilgrimage and violent anti-government insurgency in the North Caucasus. Today, however, he is going to be speaking to us about a certain economic aspect to the conflict, which actually many don't consider to be a part of the conflict at all, the issue of the Russia-Georgia WTO agreement. And his talk is based on a memo that he wrote for our conference, Crossing Borders, Validating Sovereignty, Russia, Georgia, and the WTO.
Thank you very much, Corey. Thank you. Your introduction reminds me of a surfing analogy when waves are bad because they're either small or too blown out, only the optimists paddle out. So let's see how we surf those waves today here. The memo that I present is a case study of how a state, particularly a large and regionally important military power such as Russia, may use international institutions and norms on global issues such as trade that seemingly constrain, limit, or even erode state sovereignty to assert its sovereignty, the sovereignty of its client states, and create legitimation for situations where sovereignty is disputed. So the case in point is the agreement, intergovernmental agreement on the basic principles of the mechanism of custom administration and monitoring of trade in goods, which Russia and Georgia signed in Geneva on November 9th, 2011. And that agreement was part of Georgia's acquiescence of Russia joining the World Trade Organization, of which Georgia was a part since 2000. So it was one of those rare issues where actually Georgia had a strong card in its relations with Russia. And before that agreement, this is the border photographed in 2008 on the segment where the Russian and Georgian territories joined together without any disputed territories in between. And you can see how it's locked when that location of that border crossing is indicated on the map east of South Ossetia, and that's what it looks like now. So clearly there is an improvement in the corridors of trade and relations between Russia and Georgia. You can clearly see the impact of international institutions in the region. It looks even better at night, I think, from a photo like this. And if you look at the document itself, the states that signed it said that they do it to adhere to the standards of WTO, to make trade easier by implementing the best customs and practices, to honor international norms favoring the lower tariffs and lowering of trade barriers. And the Russian government in particular said that it sees it as an opportunity to improve, quote, the transparency of its data in accordance with GATT 94, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade 94 provisions. So as part of that, Russia also said it would provide the data on trade through the internationally accepted electronic data exchange system and the international monitoring system of the World Trade Organization, and accept the mediation of a private neutral company that would monitor terminals, have presence at trade terminals, manage risks, audit reports on trade, and actually even consult the Russian authorities on appropriate practices. So there was also an agreement as part of it on applying electronic seals to goods and monitoring them through GPS, GPRS systems throughout the region. From the Georgian standpoint, that agreement was, if you quote the Georgian official statements, you will see that it is consistent with the kind of view of the agreement as, you know, promoting trade relations, improving border transactions. In a statement on the Georgia's website, embassy in Turkey, they called it an important achievement for Georgia as it enables the international monitoring of trade between Russia and the whole territory of Georgia, including Abkhazia and the Tskhinvali region, South Ossetia, Georgia. And Mikhail Saakashvili said that monitoring the movement of goods will begin within the internationally recognized borders of Georgia. So we see how the Georgian side accepts that position. The Russian side, however, has a different perspective on this, and one senior Russian diplomat, Alexander Lukashevich, in an interview to Interfax on December 23, 2011, explained it in detail. When you read the specific explanations, you understand that Russia has not ceded, from its perspective, any of its important goals in the region, a lot of which were talked about in the earlier panel today. And in some ways, the key phrase there in that interview was that the agreement was acceptable to Russia because, quote, it completely corresponds to the new realities in Georgia, in the Caucasus, after August 2008. What is the realities? This is almost the language of Kenneth Waltz and, you know, the realists. It's the stationing by now of 7,000 Russian troops in the territories of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and arrangement of guarding the borders of these states that are adjacent to Georgia by Russian troops the same way that they protect the borders of the Russian Federation. So you have a different arrangement there, that probably nothing that WTO foresaw when they were dealing with those issues. And from the position expressed by Russia's senior diplomat, the first point that he made several points on this. One was that this agreement covers only regional trade under WTO provisions, but does not cover, quote, non-trade shipments, which means, translated from bureaucratese, Russia does not need to report on the shipments of military equipment to Abkhazia and South Ossetia. The second point was about the location of these border corridors. This is one of the three where we see this kind of iconic success story for international institutionalization. But the other ones are not as well designed and equipped. This is the Inguri River crossing, which is on the line going from Abkhazia's territory to the rest of Georgia. And here you have the Pso River crossing from Russia into the territory of Abkhazia. There is some improvement there, but it's still pretty much the same as it was in 2009 when I visited it. Although I must say that those kind of little buildings that you see on the left-hand photo are quite an improvement on little shacks that were there before. So there is some development there. But the thing is that the difference between those two crossings, one in Abkhazia and one in South Ossetia, this is the one, the photo leading to the South Ossetian crossing from the South Ossetian side. The thing is that one is located on the northern side of these partially recognized states, and the other is located on the southern side. So even though these are crossings between the parties to the WTO agreement, they're separated by territories of states, the sovereignty of which is disputed. And this is where the Russian interpretation of these provisions comes in, because from the Russian standpoint, therefore, the very fact that Russia is going to furnish information through the electronic databases of WTO on trade with these states is, quote, an important attribute of Abkhazia and South Ossetia as independent custom-controlled territories, and of the status of their borders with Georgia as customs borders analogous to the Russian-Georgia border with its crossing at Verkhny Lars-Kazbegi. So, in other words, from the Russian standpoint, you can use it to interpret each of those crossings. So, crossing, for example, the same way as the Lars-Kazbegi, which you saw before, which is an interstate border crossing. And there were other things that Lukashevich said, but the gist is about the same, and particularly, for example, with GPS monitoring and electronic seals. The position that he expressed is that, yes, they're going to be used, but because South Ossetia and Abkhazia, from the Russian standpoint, are independent states, there is no obligation on the Russian side to provide the data to WTO under this agreement for goods going into those territories. So, and with regard to the neutral third party, whether it could actually formally request this information and obtain it, the position is that they do not have the right to get any information on demand. But the Russian government will decide which information to provide and which information not to provide to the Georgian side. I teased out three, political scientists like thinking in threes, three implications of this for the analysis of regional relations more broadly. One being is that the signing of the treaty even though it seemingly validates the calculus of international rules and norms, doesn't preclude Russia's use of military power for its interests, and Russia's military threat to Georgia's sovereignty remains unchanged after Russia's accession to WTO. The second one is that actually WTO enhances Moscow's capacity to plausibly deny hostile motivations toward Georgia and use it as a justification for operations in the name of preserving international law, norms, etc., etc. And thirdly, these interpretations mean that powerful states, including Russia, are also likely to exploit other WTO rules unilaterally, in particular with respect to the imports of Georgia's wine and mineral water, something that made my trips to Russia so much less exciting when these bans came about. I always loved getting Georgian wine when I went there, and all of a sudden there was nothing. In fact, the last time I bought Georgia's wine in Russia was in Krasnodar, about a year after the ban, in a little grocery store with a colorful name, Shamil. But finally, I would just say that in essence, this position of Russia is likely to endure, at least as long as the Russian government is interested in weakening Georgia's economy, and they can use the special health provisions of WTO agreements to have Georgia prove that wine and mineral water fit the standards, so put the burden of proof of them. But that position is unlikely to change, as long as the interest is there to keep Georgia's economy weakened, and then perhaps to lure Georgia with prospects of close integration to Russia and Eurasian Union over NATO and the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikhail, for undermining my first glimmer of hope. So.
But you have to surf the tough waves, you know, that only the rough get it.
We will now turn, we'll go a little bit different than the order of the program and go to Sufyan Zhemukhov. Sufyan is first of all, it's Sufyan's birthday. So again, I congratulate you.
Happy birthday.
Sufyan hails from a few different places currently. He really hails from Nalchik in Kabardino-Balkaria in the North Caucasus. He has been a visiting fellow at George Washington University for about a year, and he'll be returning in a few months. Currently, he is a Charles H. Revson Foundation Fellow at the Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. He is a specialist on nationalism and Islam, intellectual history, and civil activity in the North Caucasus, and like Mikhail, so much more. He is the author of 5 books. It has written several articles on ethnic movements and religion for a number of academic journals. He is also editor of continues to be editor of newspaper in the North Caucasus, and he will be speaking to us today on the topic of recognition without independence, Abkhazia's international context.
Thank you very much. Thanks for congratulations. It looks like my birthday has all the chance to become joke of the conference. I want to talk about the Abkhaz part of the current situation around the country, because usually Abkhazia, because it lacks broad international recognition, it continues to be rather the object than a subject of negotiations between other states. And because it lacks resources and methods and tools to pursue its own goals. Usually we don't analyze what can Abkhazia do by itself, how such a small country where only a few hundred people live can contribute to its own case. Abkhazia has some international recognition, but this so far only made it dependent on Russia. And what can Abkhazians do to deliver their status in the international context? That's the question I want to address. Just a little bit about the history of the problem. Abkhazia enjoyed the status of de facto independent state since it won its secessionist war with Georgia in 1992-1993. And after the Russian-Georgia War of 2008, up to now, 6 countries, all members of the United Nations, recognized Abkhazia's independence. Those are Russian Federation, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Nauru, Vanuatu, and Tuvalu. Yeah. Looks like not a complete list. But looking back into the history, we can see, and usually it's not much paid attention on, that the development of Abkhazia's status is not the result of consistent foreign policy of the country, but rather a series of accidental international events, and besides unconnected to each other. Ethnic Abkhazians themselves have been not consistent about their desire for independence. They have in fact applied several times to become part of other countries. They wanted to remain in the Soviet Union when Georgia split away from it, and then later twice applied to become part of Russia. But it doesn't mean that Abkhazians do not have comprehensive interests, and that they cannot use some methods to pursue them. How they managed to accomplish independence, what they have up to now. First of all, from the beginning, they had help of the Circassian community, which considers them as part of Circassian world. And Circassian world right now is considered to be as Armenian diaspora all over the world in almost 50 countries, and consists of several million people. So when the Georgian-Abkhaz War started in 1992, the Circassian world responded dramatically, and more than 1,500 volunteers went to the war, and there were demonstrations all over the countries where the Circassians live. But when Abkhazia won the victory in 1993, actually it did not bring them recognition. But the legacy of the conflict determined Abkhazians' problems for the years to come. The war claimed about 10,000 lives and caused several 100,000 refugees to flee Abkhazia, among them more than 200,000 ethnic Georgians, who had constituted over 45% of Abkhazia's population before the war, versus 18% of ethnic Abkhazians. After the war, Russia actively participated in negotiation process and gained central role. And in 1995, Abkhaz parliament applied to become part of Russian Federation, but Russia did not accept it. After 2008, Russian policy toward Abkhazia changed, and it allowed import and export. But and in 2001, Abkhazia again applied to become part of Russia, this time as an independent associate state. But Russia rejected it again. So nowadays, Abkhazia has several problems. And one of the problem is demographic problem, which it tries to resolve. During the census of Soviet time in 1983, Abkhazians were only 18%, as I said. And nowadays, they are 50% of the population. Meanwhile, Georgians were 45% of the population in 1989, and nowadays they are only 18%. So we can see that this 50% of Abkhazians in the country is a fragile number if we take in account that more than 200,000 Georgians had to leave the country and are not allowed to come back. The main problem of Abkhazia today, as experts see it, is that Abkhazia is driven in Russian direction, and there are no alternatives to this process. And actually, there were some programs that scholars, for example, one of the PONARSians, Alexander Cooley, proposed, called engagement without recognition, but so that European Union and the United States could work with Abkhazia while not recognizing it, but it wasn't put in reality. What actually drives Abkhazia into Russia, into Russian direction? Well, first of all, away from Georgia. Three main issues that define Abkhazian policy toward Georgia are the legacy of the war in 1992-93, the Georgia refusal to allow Abkhazia to trade directly with other states, and the third issue is the problem of Georgian refugees. The 62nd session of United Nations General Assembly recognized the right of all refugees and internally displaced persons and their descendants to return to Abkhazia. However, Abkhazian government fears that the return of refugees would significantly increase Georgian involvement into Abkhazians' domestic affairs, and that after the return of 200,000 Georgians, they would overtake 100,000 Abkhazians in the next elections. There is also a very important issue, sometimes neglected, of refugees' property, because the property was distributed among the Abkhazians after the Georgians left. And the redistribution of that property would lead to socio-economic destabilization of Abkhazia. And Abkhazian governments looking for ways to protect itself from the proper but impossible demands made by Georgians. And one of the solutions they see is Russian investments in Abkhazia, so that Russians later would protect their investments in the region. It looks like it doesn't have a resolution Here I wanna, as we are a policy conference, I want to propose something similar that previously was done, a way to resolve the problem, maybe to satisfaction of the both sides. The countries could agree to use the existing Georgian model for repatriation of Meskhetian Turks. Meskhetian Turks were deported from Soviet Georgia under Joseph Stalin, and now they are allowed to come back and become Georgian citizens, and they are reimbursed for their property from the state, but they have no guarantees. The Georgian government doesn't give them guarantees to return to the same area where they were deported. So Abkhazia and Georgia could use that model, and Abkhazia could similarly allow the refugees to return. From its side, Georgia could recognize that the residents left their homes in Abkhazia during the 1992-93 war because of the reasons that Georgian policy itself helped to create. And so the Georgian government, which has such resources, could reimburse the refugees for their lost property. And that could be a resolution of the conflict, and under that condition, the refugees could come back. And for the Abkhazian sphere of problem that if overwhelming number of Georgians would come back, could be another resolution that they could allow the diaspora or encourage the diaspora, Abkhazian and Circassian diaspora, to return to Abkhazia and settle there, so that the number of ethnic Abkhazian and Circassian population would increase, and so demographic problem would be solved as well. Before we started, Corey and I were talking about this proposal, and Corey said that he wonders how Georgians would react on this issue, but I think that Abkhazians would respond even more dramatically if they were in the room, because this is an approach, I realize it's very controversial, but I think that could be a realistic way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sufyan. I think I discerned a glimmer of hope in that presentation. And now we'll move to another thawing conflict, the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, with Sergei Minasyan. Sergei is a colleague who heads the Political Studies Department of the Caucasus Institute in Yerevan, holds a PhD in military history, and his main areas of expertise are military history, security studies, and international relations. He's written several articles for a number of journals and is the author of a number of monographs, including a study of the Armenian ethnic minority in Georgia, and a study called Nagorno-Karabakh After 2 Decades of Conflict, Is Prolongation of the Status Quo Inevitable? He will be speaking to us on the subject which he called properly in his memo, Coercion in Action, Compellence and Deterrence in the Nagorno-Karabakh Conflict. We shortened it for the title of his presentation, but it's probably most appropriate to keep the extended version. Sergei.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you also, Sufyan, for your very informative, and Mikhail for a very interesting and illustrative presentation. But I think now maybe we need to balance your presentation with something more boring and theoretically oriented, and this I'm going to do now. From both academic and policy perspective, the current situation in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict provides a very instructive case study in the role of coercion in the ethnopolitical conflict. And the current status quo situation of no peace, no war, the coercive policies are and will be heavily utilized both in negotiations and in efforts to influence opponents and external actors. During my presentation, first of all, I'm going to show some theoretical framework of coercion role in the Karabakh conflict, and then I'm going to analyze how the practical implementation of coercion is possible in these conflicts and what are the results of such a policy. According to traditional security studies approaches, coercion consists of two main paradigms, deterrence and compellence. In one of my previous PONARS memo presented in the last PONARS conference, I examined ways in which Armenia implements a deterrence strategy in the Karabakh conflict. Here, I'd like try to analyze the compellence strategy Azerbaijan has implemented with a comparative analysis of the interaction between these two main types of coercion. From the theoretical perspective, deterrence is typically a strategy of preservation, while compellence is strategy and compellence strategy for change. Deterrence implies a very passive approach with no fixed time frame, with the main and frequently only condition being that the deterrence opponent abstain from a particular unacceptable step. In comparison, compellence consists active political military conduct aimed at persuading an opponent to alter the status quo through the threat of force. Compellence requires permanent initiative, and to be maximally effective needs a deadline after which the compeller should be prepared to use force. By default, the implementation of compellence is more difficult than deterrence. In principle, a deterrence strategy in a given context can only fail once, when the deterrence opponent decided to carry out an undesirable step, like, for example, launching military action. In the case of compellence, there exist two clear indicators of failure. The first is if the compeller's opponent does not concede, and the second is if the compeller ends up using force. Developing the fundamentals of coercion, famous political scientist Thomas Schelling described that one of the most vulnerable aspects of compellence is its reliance on the credibility of the threats of force. The analysis of Azerbaijani officials' public statements create a perception that the Azerbaijani leadership appears not to take seriously the higher pain threshold of Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. Even the entire dynamic of the 2 decades-long conflict should have convinced them of this. It seems that this leads to the Azerbaijani government's illusory belief that compellence can succeed, when in fact it threatens to lead to a failure. Alongside consideration of variable pain thresholds, it's also necessary to explain consideration of the military balance. Just as third parties can play a role in deterrence by offering protection to allies, so-called extended deterrence, they can also play a role in minimizing compellence threats. In the case of the Karabakh conflict, the initiation of arms race based on oil and gas revenues is an important element of Azerbaijan's compellence strategy. However, the Azerbaijani-Armenian military balance does not only depend on the conflicting sides' own capacity to arm, but also on the involvement of influential external actors that provides preferential weapons transfers to Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. Moreover, while military balance is important, it's only one of many elements of an effective deterrence or compellence strategy. Indeed, a balance of motivations or interests tends to play a more significant role. Despite the many difficulties of implementing of strategy of compellence, however, it should not be thought of as a fundamentally weaker strategy than deterrence. While compellence may be difficult to realize, it also has its advantages. An actor that implements a compellence strategy secures the luxury of controlling the degree and duration of propagandistic rhetoric. In the case of the Karabakh conflict, the Azerbaijani leadership has been unable to reach its goals for 2 decades via policy of compellence. But it claims that Azerbaijan will sooner or later inevitably carry out its threats, allowed the leadership to preserve its political reputation in domestic affairs. A strategy of compellence also, a priori, creates a psychologically and politically more comfortable context regarding the threats of war. It's much more pleasant for Azerbaijani elites to consider the possibility of a new war in Karabakh as something that depends on them and their will, rather than for Armenians in Karabakh to feel under constant threat. The Azerbaijani leadership permanently threatens new hostilities with visible satisfaction, exploiting the opportunity provided by the features of compellence. Of course, a strategy of compellence also has some room for flexibility. A more positive dimension of compellence has proven effective in many cases, for example, including the US policy in Central and Latin America and the Asia-Pacific region. However, we don't see this in the case of the Karabakh conflict. Offering rewards to Karabakhi Armenians in exchange for their willingness to change the status quo could be a significant component of Azerbaijan's compellence strategy. This, however, would require serious political courage from the Azerbaijani leadership, because shifting emphasis towards the positive sides of compellence to include identification of possible compromises holds some risk for the leadership of Azerbaijan. Aside from the domestic reputation losses, it would significantly weaken the potential for a successful compellence strategy if Baku were to decide it had to return to issuing threats of war. Of course, the most recent example of how the Azerbaijan leadership, instead of offering positive proposal based on mutual compromise to Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia, choose a completely different policy, was the shocking story of Ramil Safarov extradition. I'm not going to go deep into this sad event, but it's obvious that such a medieval logic of political behavior by the Azerbaijani leadership not only caused strong criticism, but also led to the opposite results for Azerbaijani compellence policy in the Karabakh conflict. Summing up, we can say that the reason of the continuing inefficiency of compellence in the Karabakh conflict, comparing with more effective deterrence strategy, is not only its theoretical vulnerability as a strategy. Of course, to force an opponent to surrender what it already holds is much more difficult than keeping an opponent from making a move under the threat of retaliation. However, 2 decades of maximalism have also driven the side into a trap of high expectation and limited flexibility, particularly with regard to the assurance of positive proposals within a strategy of compellence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and to all our presenters for providing substantive yet concise presentations. Rather than offer any integrating remarks, I think there's going to probably be a lot of space for discussion and questions. I just want to make a few quick observations about how this panel does feed directly from the first panel. And Sergei now has suggested a conclusion that was offered in the first panel, that despite the rhetoric of the Azerbaijani leadership, despite the fears that we have of renewal of war over Nagorno-Karabakh, a lot of this has to do with domestic politics. A lot of it we might even consider to be psychological in nature, but that more or less the status quo is in equilibrium. So we have a bit more time to discuss this, see whether we agree or whether we should be more cautious along the lines that George Halashvili had spoken of about the possibility of accidental conflict or of actions that take on a logic of themselves, despite the very careful steps that the sides might make. Mikhail Alexeyev, in his remarks, echoed, I think, some of what Sergei Markodanov was saying, that what might look like a good agreement is really a manifestation of, on the one hand, of Russia doing what's in its interest, and it doesn't see that the agreement actually pose any major or even minor threat to its interests. So there's really no reason to get worked up over this agreement or the possibility that it could actually lead to something beneficial. I tend to be somewhat more optimistic about the agreement. Perhaps I'm a little bit more naive about the agreement, but I think it's worth discussing and also pointing out that the Georgians also hailed this agreement as a great success. So at least if you have the Russians and the Georgians both hailing the agreement and the Abkhaz and the South Ossetians being more concerned, maybe something positive could come out of it, and it's worthwhile to discuss. And then with Sufyan's remarks, also simply underlining this is probably the first time I've ever heard in a public arena this kind of proposal, which involves both the return of Georgian IDPs to Abkhazia and also opening up Abkhazia more actively for immigration of Circassians and possibly finding a way out of the knot that we've suffered from for 20 years, at least demographically, of how do you square the issue of return and political demands of the Abkhaz. So it's a very interesting proposal. I look forward to discussion. Also, I suppose I should say we recognize that these are controversial subjects. If CSIS or PONARS or GW were a government, I'd have to say that the views are the views of the panelists alone, and these organizations do not necessarily share these views, but these organizations don't really have views on these subjects. So the presentations have been made as efforts by the individuals themselves, scholars themselves, to propose some thinking about this subject. So with that, I invite questions primarily and very brief comments, and I will have to say if a comment starts to go on a little bit long, I will cut you off. And since, again, in the spirit of deterrence and compellence, I'm going to have to make sure that that's a credible threat. So with that, I open up the floor for a discussion. We could get all the embassies out of the way first. I'm going to wait. I'd like to wait on that and see if we get some more comments, questions first. Dmitry.
Dmitry Gorenberg, Harvard University and CNA. I have a question for Sufyan regarding the proposal to allow for Circassians to come to Abkhazia. Do you have any, is there any survey data or your guess or how many Circassians would actually come? Is this actually a realistic possibility? I mean, sort of in my mind, why would Circassians leave, let's say, Turkey and go to Abkhazia? So I'm just wondering if you have any information on that.
Let's take a few more related to Georgia, Abkhazia, South Ossetia issues. Wayne?
Sorry, Wayne Murray. My question was unfortunately on Karabakh.
Oh, next round. Sorry. In the back.
I have two questions regarding Abkhazia. The first one is, to what extent do you think that the ethnic Abkhaz of Abkhazia would view Circassians as a foreign element, not dissimilar to the way that they view ethnic Georgians as a foreign element? That's the first question. The second question would be, regardless of one's view as to the legitimacy of Abkhazia, the fact is that they are building organs of sovereignty. The question is, why are they not using more instruments of sovereignty vis-a-vis lobbying in the West, within the European Parliament, or even here in Washington, D.C.? We're on K Street, right? Why do we not see wealthy Abkhazians walking around trying to hire lobbyists to engage in trade discussions or other discussions that may be indirectly advancing the policies that they seem to be following domestically? Thank you.
More on Abkhazia, Georgia? Pavel?
Sufyan, I want to... Does it work? Yes, Sufyan, I want to kind of try to get a bit of insight out of you. I think in the relations between Abkhazia and the Circassian diaspora, something has changed with the change of Abkhazian leadership. I think President Bagapsh was generally more positively inclined towards building these relations than we see nowadays. Am I wrong on that?
Would you like a brief intervention?
I'd like to comment, obviously, but you said you threatened me.
I threaten that I will cut you off after a minute, but do you have a question?
Well, the question is enshrined in my comment.
I'll give you a minute.
Thank you, Corey. Again, David Rakweshvili from the Embassy of Georgia, Deputy Chief of Mission. I would like to comment briefly about the WTO and just say very briefly that those pictures, they are on the Georgian territory. And there was not actually the result of opening the border between Russia and Georgia. It was not an effort of the international organizations. Rather, it was a Georgia's policy. And that policy was in line with its regional affairs. On Abkhazia and how Georgian government would react, Georgian government would react actually positively on repatriation of anyone who actually belongs to the place. And we've been very clear and vocal in that in numerous occasions, and our legislative amendments are proof to that. I think that what you have described with regard to the demographic problem, I think I would interpret it, or I would qualify this as the problem of the policies, which is based on unsustainable belief that minority can rule over the majority, because that's the case now you have in Abkhazia. You have mentioned the ethnic composition of current ethnic composition, which is slightly inaccurate. You have about 1/3 of population ethnic Georgians, 1/3 of population ethnic Armenians, and 1/3 of population ethnic Abkhaz. While within the Abkhaz community you have extreme diversity, you have at least 3 or 4 groups representing varieties of roots, and that's not homogenic society. Speaking about the perspectives and future of Abkhazia, I believe that all of us will be witnessing sooner rather later Abkhaz and Georgian people becoming partners in pursuing the common goal. And there are a lot of reasons to that, and there are a lot of practical steps, and one cannot see probably it in a public statements, but let me assure that the developments are on its way. I just wanted to mention that there is nothing that could justify the kind of illegality of the ethnic cleansing. I don't believe that this is sustainable. I don't believe that even Abkhaz society eventually will be sustainable if this will be kind of the policy and the strategy to strengthen their identity or pursue their independence. So I believe that the proposal that you've made has some rationale if you kind of have a holistic approach. If you say that everybody who belongs to a certain place has right to return, Chechen, Abkhaz, Circassian, or whoever else. But if you do this at the expense of a certain population, this is a time bomb again, and this is not a sustainable solution. And the question which I would return to you, how do you think would the Russian population, where would you see the place of the Russian population between, because we've seen a number of debates about, whether Russia has been given its kind of legitimate right to have much more presence, much more presence in Abkhazia, and how would the Armenian population react, in your view, in case of such a development? Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have most questions directed towards Sufyan, but we invite other panelists to contribute.
Okay, thank you for the overwhelming interest to the subject. Well, starting with Dmitri's question, how many Circassians would return to, would come to Abkhazia? Actually, before even the Circassians, there is estimated 500,000 Abkhaz diaspora in Turkey. But they have a religion issue because the Abkhazians in Abkhazia are Christians, while the Abkhazians in Turkey are Muslims. Regarding the Circassians, of course, they are they feel themselves better in Turkey than in Abkhazia, but and maybe from Turkey we wouldn't have so much people to come to Abkhazia, but right now there are from 50,000 to 150,000 Circassians in Syria who want to come back to the Caucasus. And Abkhazia didn't allow them, didn't express any willing to allow them to resettle in Abkhazia. So actually, if such a possibility, if Circassian diaspora would have such option, I think enough people would come to Abkhazia that would balance the return of Georgians, which is the case I'm talking about right now. Regarding Genti Misha's question, how Circassians are better for Abkhazians than Georgians, I think that the support that Circassian diaspora and Circassians in Russia showed for Abkhazians make them very reliable citizens, that those who would return would support the Abkhaz national or ethnic interests in Abkhazia. So, of course, if the quality of Circassians in Abkhazia would increase very much, they would have their own interests. But again, I think that it's clear here that for the domestic issues, not to say anything about international relations with the Circassian world, Abkhazia would benefit from immigration of Circassians. And the very interesting second question of by Genti, why Abkhazians not in the US, Abkhazian politicians and businessmen? Well, the answer to it is that Russia has a very strong hold on Abkhazia right now. And just 2 days ago, there was a meeting between Abkhaz President Ankvab and Russian President Putin. And nobody knows what they talked about, but the rumor says that Abkhaz leader came out of the meeting very depressed. So I don't think that current Abkhaz leader has much choice. If we would talk about Bagapsh, whom Genti mentioned, or even Ardzinba, they achieved very much for their country. Ardzinba led the country to de facto independence, while Bagapsh achieved recognition. So they were more legitimate, and they could confront Russia, actually, if they needed to. While Ankvab doesn't have such a legitimacy. He's just came to power. He is not an equal leader as Bagapsh or Ardzinba were, and so it would be harder for him to get from Russian influence. Regarding Pavel Bayev's question, what changed within Abkhaz-Circassian relations? Actually, there is Circassian-Abkhaz relations are not good now as they used to be, because during the war, Circassians even fought for the country. After the war, they supported the country. They were actually the only supporters for many years. But somehow Abkhazia didn't make steps that Circassians saw as they deserved to be made towards them. For example, Abkhazia didn't include Circassians into favorable to immigrate in the country and to get Abkhaz citizenship. And then many Abkhaz experts and activists, but not the officials, participated in the debates about Circassian genocide issue, 2014 upcoming 2014 Olympics, which are very sensitive for the Circassian activists. And when we talk about Circassian world, it's as Benedict Anderson said, it's completely a virtual world, and we are talking about NGOs and activists. We are not talking about any comprehensive policy, actually. So it's very easy to divert them. So that's actually what happened. And one of the example of it is that in May 21st, I went to Istanbul this year and participated in the, not participated, but observed the demonstrations about meetings set there in commemoration of the genocide. And for the first time, Abkhaz diaspora organized their meeting separately from Circassian diaspora on the same day. So that means that their relations not are well. And the last question by David. Well, actually, you corrected my figures about the population. I referred to the last census in Abkhazia in 2011, and Abkhazians are 50%, Georgians are 18%, Armenians 17%, and Russians 9%. So it's inaccurate, yeah? Okay. Yes, yeah, maybe. Nevertheless, that's the figure we have. Actually, when I published this paper on PONARS site, and some Abkhazians acted the same way, saying that it's inaccurate, but in different direction, that it increases the number of Georgians there. But anyway, I'm talking from that figure. And so about the Russian population, actually, Russia is not as worried about Russian population there, or Armenia about Armenian population. Russia is more worried about military presence and economic, financial investment. So the decrease of Russian population, there were 74,000 Russians in Abkhazia in 1989, and now there are only 22,000. So it decreased more than 3 times.
How many militaries among them?
I don't think they counted militaries during the census, but yeah, the estimated figure of militaries there is about 1,500 militaries, and there is a very strong base in Abkhazia, a Russian base as well. So. Of course, Russia will react if Abkhazia will make steps to toward Georgia, and it will react if Abkhazia allows Circassians to resettle in Abkhazia. That's a very big issue concerning this project, but even starting to talk about such things as I mentioned, project of engagement without recognition, and now project of returning of Georgian refugees, even starting about it, talking about it, I think that would be a very good step toward the resolution of the conflict, and not treating it as a frozen conflict, but to resolve it really. Thank you.
Well, I will just add one more thing on the Dmitri's question on Circassian migration. I think there are two ways to look at it, from the perspective of comparative immigration studies. One way is, well, how many people may be willing to migrate, what's the sense of that, and then base the policy on it. But migration motivations come from the sense of opportunity. And Sufyan's proposal, it depends on what kind of opportunities become open, and then you can use even formulas generated by scholars of migration, such as Doug Macy. You can compare unemployment rates, and you compare median incomes, and you compare the size of various communities in the sending state, receiving state, and you can make projections and estimates actually of how many Circassians may migrate. But from the point of view, one thing that favors that kind of migration is the real estate differential in the San Diego market. In the mountains, we have a lot of great properties, but they're times and times less valuable than the same properties on the coast. And so there is always the incentive to migrate to the coast. There's always the incentive to build your future nest egg, and migration is often driven by prospects for children, not for themselves. So there are, I think, there's a lot of potential there, and Sufyan, I think, is expressing a visionary idea that has merit. And I'm grateful for the comment that came from the Georgian embassy here. The biggest argument against my own analysis is that once those rules take place, and once countries start investing in playing by these rules, even if it's haphazardly, even if they may be doing it for their own sort of selfish interests at the beginning, as long as the institutions and organizations stick around, they have a chance with changes in domestic politics to actually generate more benign change. So I wouldn't necessarily say that the present analysis of the situation denies some kind of positive fallout for it in the future. But another way to look at it comparatively would be to think of the success of the European Union, at least before the current crisis, in resolving a lot of frozen conflicts that were quite bloody at times. The Catalans and the Basques and northern Italy come to mind. And the difference between WTO and institutions like that and the EU is that in the EU, the principle of subsidiarity meant that states actually voluntarily gave up certain sovereignty provisions, whereas with the WTO and the way that the Russian foreign ministry articulates its position, there's a clear opposition to ceding any sort of sovereignty claims or the right to protect somebody else's sovereignty in that case to the international institutions. So that has to happen before things take place and before we see not only wonderful buildings on the Georgian side, but also Sapiravi in the Yeliseyevsky Gastronome again in Moscow. So no, I know. I enjoyed it in Georgia too. I'm just saying that.
Okay, now we're going to take a round on Nagorno-Karabakh, and we'll start with Wayne.
Thank you. Wayne Berry, the American Foreign Policy Council. I'd like to ask Dr. Minasyan to discuss the comment that was made this morning about the ideology of the military offensive and how it can become self-fulfilling. Because certainly in the two sides in the Karabakh conflict, there is, I think, a dangerous mutual perception that a military option can actually resolve or at least improve the situation from the point of view of the respective parties. I hear this increasingly, particularly in closed-door conversations, and I perceive a significant relevance from what was said this morning about the sort of the ideology or the doctrine of the offensive. And I'd like to hear how you relate that to your the theoretical construct that you've presented here this afternoon.
Thank you for your question. You know that the best illustration of the effectiveness of this construction is the 2 decades long preservation of this ceasefire. Because actually the military balance in the Karabakh conflict, military political balance, it consists of 2 very important and strongly connected parts. The technical balance, the technical balance of offensive and defensive forces, because you know that because of the terrain, because of the mountains, because of the fortification lines that Armenian, Karabakhian Armenian have been constructing for a long period, they have a superiority of the defensive position. But also, you know that especially during those last 10 years, we are listening about the increasing Azerbaijani military budget. They stressed and they try to show that they are buying dozen or 100 arms, tanks, and others, but it's compensated by really free or very preferential transfers, for example. And as a result, we can say not only about the qualitative balance of military potentials in the zone of Karabakh conflict, for example, Armenians thanks by their terrain, by their mountain, and by their fortification lines, but also in some category of weapon, for example, heavy artillery or operative tactic missiles, Armenian sides have superiority. And the same is the situation of air defense systems. Maybe in case of Karabakh, we have the second strongest air defense area in the world after the Israel, because the number of 300 and other middle or small level air defense system in the Karabakh maybe it's not compared with other parts in the world. And don't forget that actually Azerbaijani air forces, they are not the strongest in the region, and actually they have maybe some dozen aircraft, but they have no such crucial superiority in this sphere. But the main problem if we are talking about the possible resumption of the war, that the political interest sometimes, yes, and this is the common sense, that sometimes domestic problems can affect to make some actions on the front line, for example, using special forces, reconnaissance units, and so on. And we see that, for example, the last such kind action, it was in June during the U.S. State Secretary Clinton visit in the region. But it also illustrated the other another very important point that, of course, we have been seeing such kind of tension for a long time. We have seen that we have so-called border crashes, but we see that because and as a result of these crashes, as a result of high losses by both sides, it shows the very high price of war. And that's why the war hasn't started, and I think that it will not start. And the second, of course, after the technical level of military political balance, it's the position of the international community. As on the previous session, it was said by panelists, and especially as I know, as I remember, Sergei Markidonov, we have no so-called black and white divide in position of West and Russia, as it was in the case of Georgian conflicts before and after 2008. That's why Azerbaijan doesn't have any political support from any external actors. Even Turkey doesn't interest in a resumption of hostilities. And to be honestly, and maybe my Azerbaijani colleagues will continue, but I'm not sure that the Azerbaijani societies and elites also is interesting in the new war. So that's why we have a combination of military, technical, and political factors that affected of non-resumption of the war.
We'll continue with this theme. Anar first.
Well, I like your statement about that offering certain kind of the rewards to Karabakh Armenians would add significant component to compelling strategy of Azerbaijan. And in fact, I want just to mention that yesterday, one of the public officials of Azerbaijan mentioned that a couple of Karabakh NGOs applied to the agency that distributing grants and stated that Karabakh Armenians, as the citizens of Azerbaijan, are entitled for such a kind of the grant. So it's the first time ever since the conflict started there was such a kind of the message. But my question would be, if, let's say, Azerbaijan is going to offer something to Karabakh Armenians, or just to, let's say, add some kind of rewarding component to the compelling strategy, wouldn't it be considered it in Armenia, let's not talk about Azerbaijan, but Armenia, as a kind of the signal that Azerbaijan is weakened, or a sign of the weakness from Azerbaijan side? Elaborating on that, if we just go, for example, of Turkish-Armenian rapprochement, specifically not protocols, but a roadmap that was signed back in April. Since April until October, there was a period of the time when Azerbaijan didn't just implement any type of the actions against this kind of the roadmap or just the future protocols, hoping that this kind of the signal will kind of the makes Armenian position more softer. Right now, back analysts believe that, most of them believe that is, in fact, it's emboldened Armenian position in negotiation process. And in fact, this kind of the thing that Azerbaijan didn't take stance on after the roadmap made Armenian position more inflexible. So again, my question is, do you think that reward system or going for the softer position be considered as a weakness from Azerbaijani side in Armenian society? Thank you.
Let me collect a few questions. First here.
Thank you. Ulvi Ismail again from Azerbaijan. My two questions to Sergey. Thank you for your presentation. First, I think earlier panelists mentioned that Azerbaijan is benefiting from status quo, and historically I think that with more economy, with more oil money, they'll become stronger and the conflict will be solved better conditions for Azerbaijan in the future rather than doing now. Taking that into consideration, and also the recent events of Ramil Safarov's extradition to Azerbaijan, what's the morale in Armenia? Do they think that things are going in reverse direction and they're really losing in this long battle, or it's rather revengist or battle out, desires to battle out or to win? So that's the first question. And second question, you mentioned in your presentation earlier that the war don't only depend on military weapons, but also on external factors. And I think here you would agree that Russia is a key player, and because they're part, along with Armenia, they're a member of the collective security treaty. Do you think that if Azerbaijan wanted to benefit from a quick military action to liberate its territories, would Russia stand with Armenia, even if these territories are not part of Armenia? Thank you very much.
And my colleague from the Azeri embassy, if you could phrase your comment in the form of a question.
I'll do have a question. I'll certainly ask my question to Mr. Minasyan, but with your indulgence, just a few lines actually. With all due respect to the work of the Sergei Minasyan, actually, this is one of the most complicated presentation on position of Azerbaijan I heard ever. I didn't know that we are standing in such complicated position. From our view, it's where the clear as a standing that we have a territory to be to regain back, while the IDPs to return back, while at the same time being committed to the peace processes and negotiations, and hopefully to get the solution as soon as possible. And Azerbaijan stand in a position that the status quo is unacceptable, and we can't go along with this situation, no war, no peace. And I would certainly also prefer to honestly to have some Azerbaijan expert coming from Azerbaijan trying to explain our position, in particularly in the light of the farce created of the reaction, border and sometimes hysteria in the case of the Ramil Safarov, and also the sometimes inadequate reaction coming from the countries who discovered the situation in the region. Because just in June, actually, we had a skirmish in the borderline. There's 8 sole military killed, from 3 from Azerbaijan side, from 5 from Azerbaijan side, 3 from Armenian side. We had a 9-year-old boy killed last year in the front line. We didn't hear this kind of reactions. But situation is that in Azerbaijan, we believe that we should move forward. And there's a number of, and I'm going also to my question by there was a mention of the confidence building measures. And in the first panel, during the first panel, my colleague from Armenian embassy mentioned the snipers, others. But this kind of measures, we believe, that are mainly directed at the consolidation of status quo. What we believe as a real confidence building measure is the contact between peoples. And then we took the action in Azerbaijan initiative to bring together the Armenian community of Nagorno-Karabakh and the Azerbaijani community of Nagorno-Karabakh. There was a concrete proposal, and they should have come to Berlin to meet. At the last moment, probably from pressure coming from Yerevan, no one appeared in Berlin. And this is also my question will be, why the leadership or government of Armenia is afraid to allow the Armenian community of Nagorno-Karabakh be in direct contact with their counterparts from Azerbaijan side? Thank you very much.
That's enough questions for now, Sergei.
With my colleagues, 2 questions. One about the Safarov case reaction in domestic Armenian society, our perception. Leaving aside all the obvious moral aspects, because of course that a story affected mainly in domestic situation as a moral, some insult, but for the political elite, I don't know anybody who doesn't ask me or talk that why they did it, because I mean Azeri government, because they gave us a strong political and propaganda argument. Because it doesn't matter how it affected in Azerbaijani domestic picture. I don't know it, but I'm not sure that everything is so clear and maybe it's more complicated in domestic discourse inside Azerbaijan. For Armenian diplomats, security, political experts, to be honest, they were surprised. Me also was surprised why Aliyev did this step, because it's maybe in Caucasus, sometimes it's possible to describe in some logic of ethnopolitical thinking, trauma and psychological, I don't know, perception why they did, but it's impossible to describe anybody out of our region. For in the US or in Europe, it's impossible to decide why Azeri government did this step. And that's why for Armenian side it was a brilliant argument, and I think they will use it both in political and propagandist sphere, and it's clear. So that's why it was not a some kind symbol that shows that Armenia lose propaganda or something. It was a great opposite. But from moral side, it was really very bad and very affected incident. In case of the status quo and how in Armenia they analyzing this, I think last December Anar made a presentation, and you answered. You tried to describe it, and I think that it was very accurate answer that that time is on that side that thinks that the status quo is more preferable for its own. But we have some different situation that in Armenia maybe more society think that they are losing. In Azerbaijan, mainly political elite thinking that they are losing. This is a difference. And actually it's really very complicated, and I think that no, not think, I know, I'm sure that it's one of the main discussed questions or topics in Armenian in domestic discussion concerning the Karabakh issue. But don't forget that for Karabakh Armenians, they almost they don't have any doubts. For them, every day of their independence, every day of peace, it's their victory. So that's why there's no any discussion in the Karabakh society. About the Russian position, you know that from even just from the military point of view, the 2010 August this additional agreement number 5 protocol, which allowed Russia not allowed, which increase the guarantees of Russia toward Armenia. It allows Armenia just from the military point of view to use more forces in the Karabakh front line, because it's obvious that even one Russian soldier in the Azerbaijani-Armenian border, it will strongly complicate the utility of Azerbaijani force against the Armenian territory. And Armenian army can use more equipment, more forces in the Karabakh force. I'm talking about so-called military issues, because it's very complicated, because it's difficult, it's different levels situation, because from one side, of course, Russia doesn't have any obligations to Nagorno-Karabakh, but from other sides, Armenia is a member of CSTO, and there is the Russian military base in Armenia only because of the Karabakh conflict. And in Moscow, everybody knows very well that if Russia doesn't help Armenia in the Karabakh, and it doesn't matter about some juridical obligation in Moscow and Yerevan, everybody knows the real situation. If they doesn't help Armenia, and without any, if they doesn't help Armenia, and it doesn't matter how war ends, the next day Russian military base will withdraw from Armenian territory. And that's why it's really too complicated, and I think that the answer, it will be, nobody doesn't know the answer how Russia reacts, because it will be, it would be, but I think it will not be, it will be, it depends only on the political context in this current situation. So nobody knows the strict answer, but because of the complicated level of these relations, it means, and its influence of the military political whole context in the Karabakh, along the Karabakh conflict. And the last, it was your question about first steps. You know that maybe from society, the people in Armenia feeling everyday threats, stopping the threats, and any positive suggestion will be assessed, so-called, as a symbol of as a losing. But for the political elite, it might be signal. But of course, we are talking very theoretically, because it's obvious that on this current step, in this current situation of permanent threats, permanent threat of resumption of the new war, it's not possible. But if this situation will continue for some period, maybe in that time we will have some possibility to talk more concretely about this situation. Unfortunately, the Ramil Safarov story, it's really threatened, and I'm not sure that in the near future we will have some possibility, because the only positive result of this, or the main positive result of this ongoing negotiation during 2 decades, it was that the societies, NGO activists from Armenia and Azerbaijan, they started to talk to each together. But I'm not sure that we will be able to start from the same point after this Safarov event, but we'll see.
I want to use an opportunity by Anvar's second question and just make a brief comparison between Nagorno-Karabakh and Abkhazian cases of conflict resolution. Now we can see that the Nagorno-Karabakh case is negotiated even in this room, and it is negotiated in terms of diplomatic terms, and even if we don't say it openly, even we imply that if Azerbaijan becomes strong enough, they could attempt to resolve the issue by military sources. And I want to compare it to Abkhaz case. There is no negotiation here, even as Georgi said in the first panel, there is not even possibility of war. So that's the Abkhazian-Georgian relations they are in the dead end. And when the West just cast out any possibility of negotiations, what is really the attitude toward Abkhazes? If we say it openly, the attitude toward Abkhazes is that if Abkhazia is swallowed by Russia, then it serves Abkhazia right. That's the only attitude. So any step toward negotiations, even possibility of war, would be some way out of this dead end for Abkhazia.
Can I comment? No.
Okay, we're very short on time, so I need only questions at this moment. No comments. I see in the back.
About Karabakh, I hope.
About anything. We're open to any subjects now.
Thank you. My name is Haik Naapetyan. I am with the Armenian TV company, and I will address my question to Sergei Minassian. You mentioned about the frequent threats coming from Azerbaijan in regard to launching another offensive, another attack against Karabakh, in some cases against Armenia, and this is part of the policy of deterrence from Azerbaijan. I would like to elaborate in terms of international reaction, in regard to international reaction to these type of constant threats coming from Azerbaijan. Do you think that the international community, the great powers, Washington, D.C., Brussels, Moscow, react in an adequate way and properly to this type of military threats of Azerbaijan? And if no, then how does this situation of non-adequate reaction from international powers affect the Armenian-Azerbaijani confrontation generally? Thank you.
Hi, this is going to be short. Lala Rahimova from Baku, Azerbaijan. I actually wanted to ask this question to address it to Anar, but maybe to you and Mr. Minassian as well. You mentioned the civil society and issue and the effect of the Safarov case on the track to diplomacy efforts. If we go back to January of this year, both Armenian and Azerbaijani presidents made a statement on the significance of civil society engagement in the conflict transformation resolution, however you want to put it, and that served as a green light, basically, for civil society organizations, at least in Azerbaijan, to move forward. Now, do you think that the Safarov case will have it will obviously put us back, but do you think that this will be more on a state level, or it will be more the civil society itself that would not be that willing to move forward in this track to diplomacy and engagement with the opposite side? Thank you.
Thank you. I will start from the last question. You know that the resonance of this event, it was so strict, especially in society. So that time, so I think that now the main obstacles will come from the society level, not from the state level, because it's obvious that we will need some time, both in Armenia and in Azerbaijan as well. And I don't know about the Karabakh, because the reaction in Karabakh was more strict. But the problem, the main problem, even is not about the states in the Karabakh. The problem that I'm not sure that international communities and international organizations now will believe in effect of such kind programs. It seems, and I know just as a result of my conversation with some colleagues from international donor or peacekeeping or experts, that they're strongly disappointed. And the lack of just a financial resource and the lack of the political support from the international community to support these civil society level programs will complicate it even more than this current strict obstacles from the societies inside the conflict site. Concerning the question about the reaction of international community on Azerbaijani military threats, I think maybe you, as a representative of Armenian television, would wait and would want some more strict reaction of international society. But believe me that only that situation when there is no any divide in international community concerning the military threats, compare, for example, the Georgian conflict, it shows that there is no any support from outside, even from Turkey toward Azerbaijani military threats in the public level. But in the level of diplomacy and policy language, and also on bilateral relation, I know that the stress that the international community are really stressed on Azerbaijan. And the best example of this policy is that now we have a real, non-formal, but a real arms embargo from EU and from US countries toward arm transfer to the region. But it's clear that it's concerning mainly Azerbaijan. Because Azerbaijan is able to buy Western type very expensive weapon. So that's why it's a very good, very illustrative example of the international community reaction. But also don't forget that we see only the top of iceberg, because actually every time, for example, just when State Secretary Clinton or NATO Secretary General coming in the region, they are talking mainly about it in Yerevan and in Baku. In Yerevan, they are talking that they promised to go and to talk in Baku about it, and in Baku they're trying to talk about it. It's the other, I don't know which words they use, but its effects. But I think, fortunately, the main good thing that actually Azerbaijani government is open for such kind of discussion, because I know and it seems that political elite and many of my colleagues from Azerbaijan, they obviously understand the price of war. So that's why it's not so difficult business to talk in Azerbaijan about the non-resumption of war.
Mikhail, you had the least opportunity to participate. If you had any closing remarks.
Well, actually, the only thing I would add is, consistent with the theme of my report, is that the topic of our panel, frozen conflicts, elicited a protest at one point from the Russian government. The frozen conflict is the official EU terminology in the definition of common spaces, the great European bureaucratic language, with Russia. But from the perspective of Russia, Abkhazia and South Ossetia are no longer frozen conflicts. Russia has recognized them as independent states, and conflict is solved, and that issue is gone. So, and Nagorno-Karabakh seems to be still hot. So I don't know what kind of frozen. So maybe you know, it raises a lot of problems just with the very title of the panel.
Thanks. With that, thank you very much. It brings this session to the close. Please join me in thanking the panelists.